Hello everyone. Today we're going to take a look at the general equation for a quadratic, which is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Remember, you need to have a squared term in order for you to have a quadratic. You don't necessarily have to have the b or the c term, but you must have the square in it. Let's say, for example, we have a general quadratic and we want to find the x-intercept, so we want to set it equal to 0. Let's go ahead and do our process for completing the square. Typically, what we do is we keep our ax squared term and our bx term, and we want to get a perfect square here, so we could take a square root. So we're going to go ahead and move our c value to the other side. Remember, it's easier to get a perfect square without this coefficient of a, so we're going to go ahead and divide both sides by that a value. And that leaves us with x squared plus b divided by a with the x is equal to negative c divided by a. Alright, so we are set up right now to try to complete our square. We're going to go ahead and make our two parentheses. What we know is we know that x squared breaks up into x times x. And now that middle number, we would like to split that middle number in half so that we go ahead and put the exact same number in both quantities. So if I cut b over a, if I cut it in half, that's going to leave me with b divided by 2a. And that is what is going to go inside each parentheses, b divided by 2a. Now, when we multiply those two, so when we multiply b over 2a times b over 2a, we end up getting b times b is b squared, and 2 times 2 will give us 4, a times a will give us a squared. So we are going to add to both sides, so we stay legit, b squared over 4a squared. Now, in order to combine these two, we need a common denominator. Since this has an a and this has one a, but this has a 4 and another a, we're going to go ahead and keep the 4a squared as the common denominator, which is not going to change our second fraction here. But in order to get a 4 and an a into, in this one I already have one a, but I need to multiply the top by a 4 and an a. The negative c will still be there. So my common denominator will be 4a squared, and on my top, when I add these two together, since it's a negative plus a positive, I'm just going to rearrange it and put b squared minus 4 times ac. That is equal to our quantity squared. Alright, now, why we complete the square is so that we can use our square root feature. We're going to go ahead and square root both sides, making sure we have a plus and a minus case. So we will get our quantity, x plus b over 2a, all by itself. When we square the square root, they cancel, plus or minus. Now, the square root of the top number, I have no idea what this top number is. b squared minus 4ac is a pretty complicated number. Divided by, however, the denominator is a perfect square. 4 is 2 times 2, so the square root of 4 is 2, and a squared is a times a, so the square root of a squared is a. Our final step is to solve for x. So we're going to go ahead and subtract from both sides. We're going to subtract the b over 2a plus or minus my quantity over here. And since we have a common denominator of 2a, we can write this as x equals the negative of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, my common denominator. And that, folks, is called the quadratic formula. It works for any numbers, any quadratic. If you know the a, the b, and the c value, you can plug it in. and get the two x-intercepts of the graph. Now, this should look really familiar to you folks, primarily because you probably have seen it in Algebra 1, but also we've seen it this year. Think about the graph of a quadratic, right? One of the things that we found first off was we found the axis. The axis was the formula x equals negative b over 2a. That is not a coincidence. That is kind of what's happening here in the quadratic formula. Our first term, this guy right here, is the axis. So when we graph the axis, that's the center of the parabola. And then the plus or minus, because we know this is the negative b over 2a, if I go positive, if I move over to the right, positive square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And if I move to the left, which is negative square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. This tells you go to the center, the negative b over 2a, and then move this way to the right and this way to the left to get your two roots, your two x-intercepts, and then we can graph our parabola. So the negative b over 2a is the center, and then the plus or minus allows us to move to either side of the parabola. So it's a great connection visually, but it also is a very useful formula for finding the x-intercepts of a quadratic.